All right, so let's summarize what we discussed during this week in Module 7. So in Module 7, Project Financing Part 4, we focused on realizing a commercially viable project with profits in mind. So we understand the various profitability profiles, we understand our revenue sources, we looked at profit structures and what they entail, we dissected the waterfall and the important role of a collection agent, and we talked about a business plan, what's supposed to be in there and what's supposed to not be in there. So in this module, we got a sense of the various financial partners, their demands, their requirements. So let's look at their profitability profiles as well. And what does that really mean? What does a profitability profile mean for each of these different finance, production, and distribution partners? If we look at the bank has the lowest risk, not only because they are recouping first from the collection account, that is of course after P&A, but they are recouping first, which is why their risk is the lowest. So what the bank will look at is who's your sales agent, and is the sales agent the producer is hiring bankable? Not every sales agent is actually bankable. I would say 50-50, 50% actually not bankable. So it is important that producers check in with their bank and ask flat out, is the sales agent that I'm thinking of hiring actually bankable? The bank will then look at the sales estimates and decide if the take level, which is the level the bank will look at, they don't look at the ask level, but if the take level is acceptable to them, and they might have an opinion about that. And then they'll take the sales estimates as a form of collateral. Well, the one version of the collateral we know is the pre-sales, and those are the pre-sale contracts. The bank will review those pre-sale contracts, look at who the distributors are, what country they're coming from, and then decide whether or not they want to put a discounting on that contract when they cash flow the contract. Sometimes they don't, in many cases they do. And the level of the discounting really depends on the payment history of the distributor and the country that the distributor is from. So if a distributor, for example, has a shaky payment history, then the bank will say, you know what, I'm going to heavily discount your contract, or I might not actually cash flow this contract. That's also possible. And then, bank will take these contracts and will issue a loan against the contract. There is no limit to what that loan is. That's an asset-backed financing loan. So you could theoretically, if you, let's say, have 80% estimated sales in your sales estimates, and you pre-sale 75%. You could literally go to the bank and get 75% of your budget cash flowed from the bank. It's highly unlikely, but theoretically that you could do. Now, where there is a limit is the gap loan. And the gap loan is the area where the bank is going to be a little harsher, for lack of a better word, and they're going to look at the sales estimates and say, okay, these are the entire estimates. Here's how many pre-sales you made, and they are on the level of the pricing that you've projected, so that's good. And now we look at these unsold rights, and we're going to allocate a certain amount against these unsold rights. Usually it's 50% of whatever the unsold rights is. Sometimes it's less. It's never more than 50%, meaning you never get more than 20% of your budget, and it's going to be at least 50% of the value of your unsold rights. So sometimes the bank, wants more collateral. It really depends on the bank, but when it comes to unsold rights, they very, very closely look at the entire picture: sales agent, sales estimates, level of pre-sales, and what rights are unsold. So that is the level of risk they're taking. So they don't really take a performance risk that is overly complex, because that 20%, that is the only unsecured portion, is recouped in first position. So they are getting their money back literally from the first monies that are coming in. Obviously, when the distributors are paying whose pre-sales they have cash flowed, they get that money too. So what the bank does, they know that the life cycle for these sales is fairly short. So these bank loans are usually between, I would say, a year and 2 years. Now, if for whatever reason the bank loan is not repaid, then the bank has the right to take the entire movie over and just fire sale everything. So they take all the rights that are there, they sell it for what they can get it for, and then they use that money to pay off the loan. So that's how their default mechanism works. So the profitability for them has to do with A, how much is my risk? Ideally keep it low. And B, what interest can I charge? What loan fees can I charge? So these transactional fees is what they will look at in order to make money. Now, when we look at equity investors, their collateral still has to be sufficient, but it doesn't have to be twice the amount. Like if a bank gives you $1 for unsold rights, you need to show $2 in coverage. For an investor, for an equity investor, it's about 1 to 1.3. So if you want $1, you need to show $1.30 in your collateral. And the reason is that this $1.30 will come down to $1 by the time you've paid off a few things like your sales agent, your collection agent, whoever else is in there. And 20% obviously is what the equity investor would like to see as a premium. So you really only have a few percentage left to wiggle around. So if the collateral is less than that, meaning if you already pre-sold a lot of rights and there is not enough left in unsold rights to cover the equity investor will likely say, I'm going to give you less money, which is not bad because you're not going to need that much money because you have all these pre-sales. What I'm saying is that the equity investor does want to see some collateral in potential distribution revenues that will cover the amount that they're financing. So usually they make money obviously with the premium, but they also make money being attached to the IP for the entire time of the IP, so in perpetuity. So they make money not just for the first cycle, for the first license period, which is anywhere from 3 to 15 years, but they also make money when the second license period starts after that, and then when there are maybe sequels or spin-offs or whatever not deriving from the IP, the equity investor will participate in all of that. So their upside is multifaceted because they're looking at different sources of revenues, not just the first run distribution cycle, which is what the bank does. Now the producer is in a similar position than the investor because they look at the very same things. They want to make sure that there's enough money to cover the investor. They also want to make sure there is enough money that is then left for them. Because if the investor cannot be covered, that means the producer will never reach profit participation and is really only doing this for the fee in the budget. That fee is usually not enough to make it worth your while. It's something, but it's really not super interesting. So the producer would be much better off in trying to make a very strong finance plan happen that allows the equity investor to recoup so that the producer can also get profits. So they're looking at, having the same ownership to the IP, or, in reality, they control the entire IP, but having the control over the IP in perpetuity forever, and then distributing distribution rights and licensing distribution rights, which is how they make money. So those distribution rights for the time being will be licensed to the various distributors and then transfer to them for a license fee. And after that's done, they go back to the producer. So the producer, like the equity investor, makes money off the profit in the second cycle or in future cycles, or with sequels or spin-offs and so forth. The sales agent looks at a project and saying, okay, A, is this worth my while? Meaning, is this thing worth my time? If it's a semi-interesting movie, they usually don't want to waste their time because they have enough of those. They want to look at something that they know is not going to be a super difficult sale. For them, the interest is, I want to make a strong enough sales fee on this thing that makes me money. So they are looking for projects that will generate a lot of sales, but also generate sales in a certain level that makes it worth their while. So if it's a low budget movie, it usually doesn't generate as much sales as if it's a medium range budget movie. The work is the same for the sales agent. So they like medium range budget movies with somewhat renowned cast so that they can make some money. They're also looking at the sales contracts ideally being 15 years and up. Now, that's not necessarily what the producer would want. because they want to make sure that the sales agent performs. So it's in the producer's interest to say, I want to keep this agreement a little shorter. It's in the sales agent's, interest to say, I want to keep it a little longer. So usually you kind of meet in the middle, and then you give the sales agent the right to sell the distribution rights of your movie for a specific time exclusively. The mezzanine lender is similar to the bank. They function like a bank, and the only difference is, well, there's actually two differences. One is the collateral doesn't have to be double. So when a mezzanine lender gives you $1, they want to see about $1.50 to $1.75 in collateral. So it's not quite $2 like the bank would want to see. But they do want to see more than the equity investor. So you got to have enough collateral for the mezzanine lender to give you some money. The mezzanine portion is usually small because you think about how much collateral do you really have available to cover this level of financing. You usually don't have enough, so you keep your mezzanine level small and then have the equity come in because the requirement for collateral is lower with the equity. So that means you can spread your pot, your collateral pot, which is your distribution rights, a little wider and can make more money with it. That's the idea. So again, the bank would want to see, if they give you $1, they want to see $2 in collateral, meaning unsold rights. If the mezzanine lender gives you $1, they want to see about $1.50 in unsold rights. If the investor gives you $1, they want to see about $1.20 to $1.30 in unsold rights. This is what we talk about when we say sufficient collateral. The bank does not look at upside. The equity investor obviously looks at upside, and the mezzanine lender actually also looks at upside. So that's kind of the part where the mezzanine lender mirrors the equity lender. So they want to have a little bit of a profit participation. They're also sometimes charging you an interest, and they're charging you a premium. So for them, they make money in different levels. They make the interest fee, they make the premium, and they make some profits. The percentages are usually lower, but that is how they make their money. And they are recouping behind the bank, meaning if, let's say, the bank loan is not recouped and the bank takes over the movie, the mezzanine lender has nothing to hold on to. If the bank has recouped and the mezzanine lender is next in line, sorry, that's my phone, is next in line, and then let's say the mezzanine loan has not recouped, usually the mezzanine loan is a little longer, can take up to 5 years, then the mezzanine lender would take over the movie and fire sale all the rights. So everyone in that chain has the right to take over the collateral after the first person has passed the bucket on to them. And they only take over the bucket, so to speak, the IP bucket, if they don't get paid in time. The tax credit lender is a little different because they are not recouping from distribution revenue. So they don't really care about profits. They don't care about, what collateral you have, because their collateral has nothing to do with distribution rights. Their collateral is simply the fact that they're advancing an incentive, a production incentive that is given to the producer by an incentivized region. So they look at the region and the economic viability of the region and their payment history and paying out incentives as a collateral. So that's what they look at. So if, for example, they cash flow a Georgia tax credit, they know usually Georgia pays all as well. If they are cash flowing a tax credit from a region or a country that is new, that just has released a credit, then they might charge a little more. They still might cash flow it, but they might just charge a little more. So for them, they look at this and saying, we'll take the risk by betting on the incentive region. They also know that the loan is very short term because they get their money back literally right after the movie is produced. It doesn't even have to be delivered. It doesn't have to go into the festivals. They don't care about any of it. The minute the movie is produced and the expenses are done in the region that it's produced in, they can go file the necessary paperwork to apply with the incentive region for payment. Post-production service and music investments are in-kind services in the sense that what they do is they give you money or they defer their position that is based on a line item costs that you have calculated in your budget. So for post-production, you obviously have a post-production budget calculated, and the post-production house likes to make sure that they actually get the movie and can book it, or the TV show. So what they do very often is they make a deal with you where they say, if you give me your movie, I'll defer some of my fees. So that means you, as the producer, would not have to put so much money together. Your funding pressure is lower. Your cost of financing is also lower. And then the post-production house is happy that they have secured another project that will be post-producing there anywhere from 2 to 3 months or longer if it's a visual effects driven film. So they do that in order to sign up the project, which is fine. So what they then do at the end is they'll charge you whatever they have deferred in the recoupment phase, and they add on a little premium. The music investment, even though they're also paying for the music budget, which includes the music editor, you know, the what is it called? I can't remember the word now. Damn it. The composer, that's the word I was looking for, and, you know, music production in any shape or form that is created for the project, they pay for that, and they are recouping out of music royalties, which are generated when the film is distributed. We have a few different revenue sources I want to touch on. Obviously, if we have a movie that's theatrically released, then we go into theatrical distribution, maybe in the US, where we have box office revenues, and then we have television, VOD, internet, DVD, and so forth revenues from domestic distribution. Now, if you, as the producer, sell the domestic distribution rights to a domestic buyer, which can be a studio, a mini studio, or a network station, or a streamer, they take over the revenue flow and the revenue sources that are deriving from that territory. Now, the territory that they're handling, that they license, will obviously generate money, and the idea for the domestic distributor then is to generate more money than they actually gave you when they paid the license fee, which is a minimum guarantee. What happens when they paid you the minimum guarantee and then they recoup through their distribution channels and the exploitation revenues in the territory? Maybe they recoup more than what they gave you. At that point, they start revenue sharing with you. Now, for the foreign sales, it actually is similar. Foreign sales also, you would sell to distributors that could be theatrical distributors or network station or streamers. They would handle the exploitation of the film or TV show very similar than the domestic distributor would do, and they too will give you a minimum guarantee up front, which is your license fee. And then if the movie or TV show does well in their territory, in their country, during the time that they have this distribution license, and it exceeds the minimum guarantee that they pay you, they will also rev share with you. Now, with internet and streaming, it's a little different. I've yet to see a streamer that actually pays a revenue, an overage. There are internet streamers that do deals that are rev share deals. Sorry, my phone is going off. That are rev share deals, and what that means is in many cases that they don't pay a license fee up front, and they basically say, we share with you in the pot of money that we're generating by streaming your content. That's one way of making money with a streamer, by sharing the revenues that they're generating. So let's say a movie is online or a TV show is online, and every time you watch it, you have to pay $1.99 to watch it. So a lot of people around the world pay $1.99 to watch it. So that money comes in, and they will then share that revenue with you. Obviously, some expenses apply, but in general, that's what a rev share is. And if a streamer buys the movie for the territory that the streamer wants it for, like Netflix doesn't just buy for the US, they also buy for other territories, that deal usually means that they buy out that territory. And buying out means that they usually own it forever. Now, there are Netflix deals or streamer deals that work like a regular distributor deal, foreign or international, where they just buy the rights for a certain country / territory for a certain time. Again, profit participation, I haven't heard, but maybe that's what they're going to do in the future. Ancillary rights are usually referred to as, for example, airline rights, hotel rights. We haven't touched on that much, but those are obviously worth money, and the bucket is not very big, but they do exist. And there's also, of course, merchandising, which is usually generated by the producer unless those rights were assigned to whoever bought them. But the producer can, create, let's say, a book with the movie, or T-shirts, or hats, or whatnot, and that would be merchandising revenues that goes in line. And the hotel rights or the airline rights are usually sold through the sales agent as well. Now, reruns and spin-offs, no matter if it's a movie or a TV show, is something that can generate revenues even when you're just selling a TV show as a format to another country that does the same TV show that is a US TV show here, maybe in their country, in their version, in their language. So that's a format. When I started working in the television station in Germany, I produced US formats for Germany. So I produced a German version of The Price is Right, the German version of Jeopardy or Family Feud. Those things we produced with the German host, with German contestants, same rules, just different bodies. That's what formatting is, and that is a source of revenue. Brand sponsorship is a source of revenue, obviously, because branding supports not just the message of the movie, the tone of the movie, and expands on your way to market the movie or the TV show, because the minute a brand is attached, the brand will use that content, of course, to generate eyeballs. So that's in your favor, and that generates revenues. And for the brand, it's important that you distribute the movie in a way that generate eyeballs. So there, the interests are aligned, and that's why brand and sponsorship revenues should be included in your finance plan. We mentioned waterfall a few times, and when you hear waterfall, just think about a water trickling down, a mountain or so, because what happens is on the top, the water is very strong, and then it kind of drizzles down, and that has to do with when we start our revenue distribution recoupment schedule. In the beginning, we sell a lot of rights, and then it kind of gets less and less and less because our rights pool is depleting. So that's why it's called a waterfall. And the ranking of the waterfall, as I mentioned before, is important, because if you're high up the waterfall, you surely make your money back. The lower you are in the waterfall, you might just get dribblies. So it is important to make sure that whoever is in front of you in the waterfall gives you still the option to make money. So you have to kind of know, if you are an equity investor, who the producer puts in front of you and what those deals look like. And equity investors have a right to ask the question, and the producer should be and has hopefully is professional enough to share that with an equity investor. So when we look at the parties that are included in this CAMA, which is the Collection Agent Management Agreement that kind of structures that waterfall, we obviously have producers. We would have crew in there if you have crew that has deferments or profit participation. We have talent in there, of course, because most talent has profit participation. You have any service providers in there that deferred their cost or a portion of their cost or remuneration. Anyone obviously in there with profit participation. So whoever you had who helped you put together the movie, any other producers, obviously cast director, anyone who helped you put together the movie has a few points in there, would be part of the CAMA. The banks are included in the CAMA unless they are recouping outside of the collection account, which sometimes happens. Banks will sometimes say, we want to have our own account for our own loan, and we want the distributor to pay into our account until we pay it off, and then we assign all the overages to go into the collection account. That sometimes happens. I had that happen to me on one movie. But in general, all the money goes into the collection account. And then the bond companies would be part of the CAMA, because the bond company is responsible for any overages. So let's say you go over budget, producer goes over budget, bond company has to pay for these budget overages. And the bond company is going to say, well, we want to recoup some of them, thank you very much. Even though they are an insurance company, and even though you paid an insurance fee for being insured, if they actually have a claim, they still want to make their money back somehow. So they want to be in the CAMA in some form or shape, and want to make sure that they get their hands on some of the money in case budget overages occur. Sales agents and distributors are in there because sales agents and distribution expenses are paid out of the CAMA. So that means that everyone who is owed an expense or a cost would be paid out of the CAMA as well. I would say that the CAMA is the most essential document of any independent production, film or television, because it's the heart of what's going on with the project. It shows who is the distributor, who does anything, who gets anything, who pays anything, who invests anything, and what their deal is. So this is the one agreement that summarizes all the agreements that are related to financing and distribution in one agreement. So this little graph is the word I was looking for. Yes, this little graph here I put together to kind of run you through this is actually a waterfall graph. So it starts, this is designed for a theatrical movie. So this movie that we're doing this for actually has ticket sales, meaning box office revenue. So you look at this and you see that the box office revenues in the theaters already split early on. So let's say you have a movie in the US going out on 3,500 screens and you make, I don't know, $100 million in box office. That maybe you're lucky. There you go. Then of that $100 million in box office, which is ticket sales, the theater exhibitor will immediately grab some money. And how much they get is between them and whoever gives them the movie. So it's usually between them and the studio. And usually it's somewhere between 30 to 50% that they get, depending on what the deal is with the studio. The balance then goes to the domestic distributor, meaning the studio that put the movie into the theater. And then the studio will charge against all these revenues, its P&A, its distribution fees, its expenses, anything related to distribution, it will charge against it. And it will charge any overage, minimum guarantees it might have paid. So let's say that the studio, let's call it Warner Brothers, acquired a movie from you to distribute in the US, and they paid you $2 million. They then take the movie out in the theaters. So what happened is they take the movie out in the theaters, movie makes $100 million in the box office. It's unlikely with a movie that has $2 million in advance, but let's just run numbers for easy sake. So let's say Warner Brothers comes to you and says, I really like your movie, I'm paying you $2 million as a license fee, I'm taking this movie out theatrically on, I don't know, 3,500 screens, I'm doing a wide release, and now the movie makes $100 million in box office. The theater owner, let's say, gets 30 million, and let's say the studio gets 70 million. So now the studio takes that 70 million, charges distribution fee. It's usually anywhere between 25 to 35%, and it then charges all the P&A that it has invested in creating the marketing campaign. It charges some interest that it had in financing whatever marketing campaign it financed, and it will then also charge the MG. So all these things will be deducted, and then if there is something left, a revenue share will occur where the studio will share with you the upside. So the rev share could be everything that's above and beyond after all these deductions will be 50-50. 50% goes to the producer, 50% goes to the studio. It's not, this is a kind of a deal that is not that rare. So this could happen. So let's say you made, after all these things have happened, you made some money, you have some money left. That money that's left will now go into the collection account and is your US distribution revenue. This will go into the collection account together with all the international revenues that you also received, because you only sold the US. You didn't sell international rights. Those rights are being sold by the sales agent. So the sales agent goes ahead and makes all these beautiful distribution sales all around the world, and all that money now goes into the collection account. If you have worked with a union in the US, so let's say you work with SAG or WGA or DGA, they would be getting residuals. Now, the residuals position, sometimes I have to say, is not always written in stone. So it could be right there in the foreign revenues, right when the money comes in, but it could also be, and very likely so, behind the bank at minimum. So what happens in many cases is that we push, or producers, our job is to push the union residuals as far down the line as possible, because otherwise it's going to be very hard for us to talk anyone into giving us money if they don't know what residuals are going to be in front of them and going to be recouped in front of them, because there isn't really a defined number. We don't know what the residuals are until we know where we sold the movie. So we have no idea what it could be. So we kind of want to make sure that that position can be moved down a bit. Now the collection agent charges his collection agency fee, the sales agent charges the sales expenses, and then the rest still goes into the bank account. We're seeing here that the bank is recouping after the sales agent fee has been taken. This is not always the case. I want to mention that here, because very many banks will tell you, I am not going to allow the sales agent to charge the sales agency fee or the distribution expenses before I recouped. That happens a lot. So, well, a lot. I would say it happens enough. So in that case, the bank will push up, sales agent will push down. Obviously, the sales agent has to agree to that. So you have to make sure that you mention it to them. And it might be, something that you put in the contract, that if a senior lender requires the sales agent to defer the fees after the senior loan is recouped, that's something the sales agent would agree to. You might want to put that in the contract. So and by the way, we'll talk about contracts in a later module. Just want to give you that little heads up. So after the senior loan has been paid, the mezzanine lender, if you have one, would be next in line to get paid, and they usually get a little premium. So the mezzanine loan and the premium will be recouping next. After that, we have the equity investment, and after that, the equity premium, and then after that, we have deferments. And then after all that is done, we get to what is called net revenues. And now all the profit participants will be paid at the same time. So what you see here, the ranking, is not going to apply when you do the profit participation. There, you're going to pay the percentages out in whatever form you have contractually agreed them. We talked a little bit about what the collection agent does. He collects all the revenues in relation to a movie and spends and disperses all the agreed expenses and the profits. He is responsible to speak to any and all party to the collection agent management agreement, which includes the sales agent, the producer, the financiers, the guilds, the co-producers, profit participants, deferred participants, completion guarantor, the talent, the merchandising, the broadcasters and distributors, if they're part of the project, and anyone else who receives revenues.